Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and in this presentation we're going to be going over a case study of the 2018 pre-season soccer strength and conditioning program that I undertook for the Brunswick Zebras under 14 squad. So to put everything into perspective, first I'm going to outline the circumstances and limitations that were present with this situation. So essentially we had 9 weeks until the first game, so a 9-week preseason, and I was able to do two 30-minute strength and conditioning sessions. So I only had 30 minutes twice a week, and this was before their regular soccer training, so their skill soccer practice. So I had no equipment. The only thing I had was basically an open soccer field, and any equipment that I needed I had to bring myself. Nothing was provided by the club, and there was no funding. So this was a voluntary role, and basically we had 20 to 30 players on average turn up to each session, and in total we had over 40 players try out for the squads. So this was actually 2 teams I was taking at the same time. So we had 9 weeks, so in the first week we did some initial baseline testing with the kids. So we did a 30-meter sprint, a standing broad jump, a Illinois agility test, and a yo-yo intermittent recovery test. So the 30-meter sprint, we got the Fusion Sport timing gates out, tested their maximum velocity basically. Standing broad jump for lower body power, basically from a stationary position, jumping as far as they can, and landing. And then we measure from the start to where their back foot heel lands. And the Illinois agility to measure change of direction ability. Again, we got the timing gates out for maximum accuracy. And this was my preferred test for change of direction. Then the yo-yo intermittent recovery test was my preference because of its intermittent nature rather than continuous nature in something like the beep test or a time trial. And that was the testing. So into the actual training. So the first 3 weeks of actual training, so week 2, 3, and 4, we focused on, in terms of speed work, we focused on a lot of technique, because a lot of these kids haven't done any strength and conditioning type training before. They don't really know how to run properly. Their arms were going everywhere. Some of them were dragging their feet. They weren't getting the knees up. So we did a lot of running technique. And we also emphasized acceleration to actually get some adaptation out of them. So we did a lot of acceleration work. In terms of power, we did a lot of basic jumping and landing in order to emphasize technique and especially force absorption. So once they do a big jump, can they actually land and absorb that force? Because if they can't absorb that force eccentrically, then their ability to actually change direction and use the stretch shortening cycle is probably going to be not very good. So we taught them how to do a basic jump with maximum propulsion, triple extension, and then how to properly land and actually absorb that force with their by bending their knees and keeping their heels down, etc., with good technique. In terms of strength training, this was very difficult to do any strength training because I just had an open field, 25 kids roughly, and no equipment. So what we did was we did a lot of eccentric hamstring strength. So we did a lot of things like Nordics, that sort of stuff, because that's easy to do with a partner. I just had to bring some foam pads for them. And then we did some dynamic trunk strength. So some core type stuff, some partner ab work really. In terms of conditioning, we worked more on general aerobic capacity. A lot of these kids hadn't really done much sport since the last soccer season, so they were not in the best shape. So we did a lot of general aerobic capacity stuff to build a solid base. We still did it in an interval nature, so it was somewhat entertaining for them, and it was somewhat fun. So we did intervals, but these were tempo. They were timed quite slow, quite slow speeds, but longer durations and longer distances. Moving on, so the last 4 weeks of the actual training, so weeks 5, 6, 7, and 8, In terms of speed, we started focusing more on maximum velocity running, so maximum speed and change of direction. So we sort of built from that acceleration, and we slowly increased the distances and started working on maximum velocity work. And in terms of change of direction, we sort of basically went from starting off at quite mild change of direction, quite mild changes of direction, so 45 to 90 degrees and pretty short distances. And then we slowly progressed to longer distances and sharper cuts. So we went from 90 all the way to 180-degree cuts. And we also increased the distance because when we increase the distance, basically they have longer time to reach a higher speed. And when they reach a higher speed before they have to change direction, they actually get it's basically more force that they have to produce to actually absorb that force and then change direction and propel themselves. So it's actually a little bit more taxing on their bodies. In terms of power work, we went from those basic jumping and landing exercises to the same sort of stuff, but on a single leg and in multiple directions. And we also introduced some plyometric work. So some basic plyometrics, just hopping over cones in minimal time on the ground as possible. In terms of strength, again, that was pretty hard. We continued our eccentric hamstring strength work, but we sort of started to do some more single leg stuff. We introduced a squat / lunge pattern, which is quite hard, having to supply dumbbells for over 20 kids. And then we went from our dynamic trunk strength to some isometric core strength, so things like planks and things of that nature. In terms of conditioning, we basically introduced repeat sprint type endurance, which wasn't actually, it wasn't too different to what we were doing in the earlier weeks with the interval running. The only thing we did was we shortened the distances and we increased the speeds and basically gave them shorter times where they have to work more intense at that time. They also had more a higher work to rest ratio. So in the first few weeks we had probably a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. In these we had about a 1-to-3 work to rest ratio. And then in week 9, the last week, that's when we redid the testing. So their 30-meter sprint, standing broad jump, Illinois agility, and yo-yo intermittent recovery with exactly the same order and exactly the same. We tried to keep the warm-up exactly the same. And these are the results here. So in terms of our 30-meter sprint, we had around a 0.172 second improvement, which is around 3.5%, which I was pretty impressed with, seeing as speed's quite a hard quality to improve. Standing broad jump was probably the most disappointing, and this is probably because we only had about a 2 centimeter improvement, about 1.1%. And this, I'm guessing this was because of the lack of strength and power and weighted power work that we did, just because of the lack of equipment. But we still had an increase on average overall. In terms of the Illinois agility, there was some quite big improvements in this one. We had over half a second improvement on average, which is around 3.3%. So that was a really good result, and not surprisingly. And then our yo-yo intermittent recovery test, so our endurance tests, we had about 0.7 stages of improvement, which is around 4.9%. So that was a nice solid improvement for the kids. And that's it for this presentation, guys. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully this outlines some sort of realistic program and how much you can progress in a real life scenario. So you can follow Movement and Performance on Facebook and Instagram. And on Facebook and Instagram, you'll find these research infographics, which are essentially the latest research summarized into these easy to understand pictures. So if you're interested in learning more about sports science and sports performance training, then you can check that out. So it basically gives you a summary of the results, which is easy to understand, so you don't actually have to go into the journals yourself and read the research papers. So thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully you got something out of this video.